Hi, I'm going to share a bit with you today about a recent conversation I had at a men's breakfast, and I'm going to share some information about myself and my brain injury and wrap it up with some pornography treatment. Okay, my name is Brian, as you know, and when I was about 22, I was halfway through my Bachelor of Arts at York University when I had an accident, car accident. I was broadside at a red light. I had an 18-day coma. I was semi-conscious for 5 weeks. Went down to 123 pounds. Things like dressing, eating, swallowing became a problem to me. And I wasn't walking. I had foot braces and eventually I had surgery. But pastors and elders in my church prayed over me, anointed me with oil, and God has blessed my recovery. I finished my bachelor's at Liberty University, yeah, in Virginia, and I eventually finished my master's at Tyndale, focusing on counseling. Now, I've read a lot about neuroscience, but I'm not a doctor and I'm not a PhD. But I do have a master's and I've got a real interest in this area. My memory is still decent. I knew people, facts, etc. I still remembered my favorite TV show was Magnum PI, and I even had the obligatory 80s mustache, which was fantastic. But I did have some retrograde amnesia, which was loss of memory from the hours before or even the night before. I can add more on that later if I remember. Okay, so what happens in a brain injury? Um, what happens in a brain injury is usually what they call a coup and a contra coup, which is the brain is bounced inside the skull cavity. Um, so the initial hit would be the coup. The uh, recurring bouncing back would be the contra coup. Now the brain is densely compact. It folds over itself, as you've seen in any kind of any cartoon or drawing, or even you may have seen some actual photographs of brains. You'll see that they're folding back and forth over each other, and that increases the surface area of the brain. And as such, a lot of blood is needed to allow it to function properly. So, about 20% of the blood in the human body is contained within the brain itself. It's a jelly-like substance around the brain that holds it in place. That's called the cerebral spinal fluid. There's the dura matter and the pia mater, which is a little more specific, but we won't go into that right now. Um, the brain sits on top of the brainstem, and the attachment area of the brainstem is actually very similar to about the size of a thumb. And there are many neurons affected right at the top of the brainstem there, and it's actually the sleep awake or the comatose state is activated by that. That's called the reticular activation system. The natural position for the brain is in regulated by this fluid. So if the skull is penetrated or the hard skull is moved quicker than the fluid can reach equilibrium, like in a sporting injury where there's a hit or someone is shaken, you might know shaken baby syndrome, or in vehicle collisions. When that happens, the brain is damaged by contact with the inside of the hard skull and the twisting, shearing of the tens of thousands of fibers, transmitting messages throughout the brain. So there's a real change in the brain itself. So when the brain is repairing itself, sometimes new pathways can be made as actions are repeated in order to compensate for these damaged neurons. This process is called neuroplasticity. However, the pattern of training can also have negative consequences, and I'll get into that a bit later. Now, we can find the brain is we use a hand model, which is often like this, and this would be, if you fold it over like this would be the prefrontal cortex, the brain itself, the brain stem down here. If you unfold your hand, this part here exposed would be the limbic system. The limbic system is composed of the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, for instance, the mammillary bodies, and if we explain those a little bit, it's quite complicated, so I won't go into all that right now, but the cingulate cortex is there as well. So the inside the thalamus, there are two. The inside the limbic system is the thalamus. So there's two thalamus, which are about two lobes each sides of a walnut, and they interact with the cerebral cortex. Sensory movement, perception, the sleep-awake, and the optic nerve has a strong connection with the hippocampus. Here in the thalamus, just a side note here, the sleep-awake cycle is regulated by the optic nerve being so close. If that's something that when sunlight hits your eyes, you wake up. That it kind of brings your whole brain system online, if you will. The hypothalamus is the lower part of the thalamus. It regulates body temperature, thirst, hunger, mood, and your sex drive. The nucleus accumbens, and also another important area of the limbic system, is the preoptic area of the hypothalamus. It mediates pleasure and reward through dopamine, which we're probably familiar with that a little bit, which is the area, not the area, but the dopamine is the chemical release for attention and desire. It also releases the norepinephrine, which boosts exhilaration and memory when certain things can be remembered in vivid detail, even from years before. Serotonin, or the feeling of satisfaction, is given through this chemical, and it calms and lowers inhibition. This combination is important in understanding addiction. Then also released here is oxytocin, which is the chemical that is used for bonding. The visual and auditory cortex connect to the hippocampus, but not as strongly. And a smell, and the smell is right connected to the amygdala in your brain. The nerve fibers from the are connected with. So memories connecting with your smells can be very strong as well. If you can remember grandma making cookies in the kitchen, that kind of thing, memories are really strong. That's connected directly to the amygdala. The amygdala is also the area responsible for emotion, fear, anxiety, impulses, and drives, and also the seat of the fight, flight, or freeze reactions common to many of us. There's also the periaqueductal gray, which is responsible for undirected escape, which you may have seen on cat videos, other places in the on the YouTube channels. But that's not important here. From there, we move to the hippocampus, which is also where memories are consolidated. We move around to the fornix of the limbic system, and the thalamus, which projects into the cingulate cortex, and then the cerebral cortex. Mammillary bodies, where direct memories two different ways, either back to the thalamus, where it brings it around, or hippocampus, and to the fornix, which is actually a Latin term for brothel. So you might want to, that's kind of an interesting way to remember that, and I'll expand on that a bit later. The Latin word is very similar to brothel, which is an area outside of the Roman soldier encampments was the fornix. So then they're solidified. Then they move to the cingulate gyrus, where memories are shuffled off and stored in the cortex, the frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal lobes. Okay, so that's interesting. So I'll get back to that, and we'll speak some more about pornography next time.